Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
We also have Valentino Stoll.
Hey, now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And this week we have a special guest, and that's Greg Molnar. Greg, do you want to say hi, introduce yourself, let people know why you're cool?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Molnar. And as an introduction, I'm a Ruby on Rails engineer for maybe 12 years now. And 7-8 years ago, I started to shift a bit towards security. I did some penetration testing courses, and I'm still into development, and I'm splitting my time like 50-50 between security work and development these days.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there. Oh, cool. And I can bet that you find some interesting stuff where the two intersect, right? Where you have security vulnerability in Rails or things that people don't secure. We actually invited John because you wrote an article about server-side request forgery. I think most people have heard of cross-site request forgery, but this was new to me. Do you kind of want to give the 10,000-foot view on what this is and why we need to worry about it?
Yes, sure. But server-side request forgery is actually pretty underrated because people think that it's not a serious security issue. And the same is true for XSS. But the thing is, once you have a low-level security issue and you find another low-level one, you might chain them together, and that chain can become more serious. Like with server-side request forgery, there's a good example from GitLab. GitLab is actually, I love GitLab because they are open source. So whenever there is a security issue with GitLab, you can look at the source code and see what mistakes the devs done to end up in that situation. And there was a server-side request forgery in GitLab, which allowed a potential attacker to send requests to an internal service. And then there was another issue where they didn't escape share line breaks. So chaining the two together ended up in a code execution on the server, a remote code execution on the GitLab host, which is a pretty serious thing because once you have that one, you have access to everything on the server.
Right.
But in Rails, it's actually enabled by default. I think it's enabled by default, the server-side request forgery protection. But if it isn't, probably everyone enables it. So you are usually safe from it. But there was a time when doing AJAX requests to the servers, you had to pass the token yourself. So it wasn't passed automatically. And those days, a lot of folks just disabled the server-side request protection on those endpoints, which could lead to security issues.
So how is this different? I don't know if I completely understood how this was different from the cross-site request forgery, where, you put the, how do I put it? You put the key, it's an extra field that goes in your form, right? Hidden field, sends the token back. And then we know that it was a request from our server within the last hour long, right? And that seems to be kind of publicly facing the server-side request forgery. It almost looked like it was from, I don't know, from some other trusted source.
Yes, because it was coming from the internal network.
I think the lesson here is to never trust the user input.
Yeah, that's actually, that's the main thing in security. Never ever trust anything which is coming from the user. That's always tainted. And go from there. And then whitelist everything which you think could be whitelisted. But the problem here was that there was no server-side request forgery protection enabled for an endpoint, and it was on the server. So they created a job, and that job was executed the request on the internal network. And that's how you were able to access Redis, because it was on the internal network. And from the Redis, then you could get the remote code execution.
Yeah, because a lot of times when we're talking about server hardening, we're usually focused on the entry points. So if you have SSH exposed, your port 80443, then that's basically what you lock down, have a failed to ban, and that kind of stuff. But if it's on the internal network communicating, I think that's where we usually get really relaxed with our hardening, because we have our Redis, our database service, all on the same VPC or network. And we don't do too much hardening on the Redis or the database side because those are not externally accessible at all. They're locked down to just our virtual machines or whatever services within that VPC. So is that something that we should be concerned about or take further steps in hardening, like only communicate over Redis, over the SSL and that kind of stuff?
Well, that wouldn't really help because it just encrypts the traffic. But yeah, you should always make sure internal requests are also treated like they are external. You should still verify things. You should still prevent accepting any data. You should still validate things and verify that it's not like a code execution payload and stuff like that. Because even though it's coming from your internal network, maybe you make a mistake somewhere and someone can make a request which acts like it's coming from your internal network.
Yeah, it's funny, like the whole move to Docker has kind of like opened up a bunch of people to this concept, right? As I think, okay, well, Docker is going to isolate a lot of these inter-service things, and I won't need to necessarily, think of them as external as long as they're only communicating to each other. And that's kind of like been Docker's initial mentality, right? It's like, well, we gain security by encapsulating, particular pieces of the pie. And it's kind of evolving to be like, well, doesn't necessarily work like that, right? You still need to, like you're saying, make sure that all of those pieces are protected and isolated and encapsulated. And I'm interested what your perception on that is, like from a network layer piece. Like, do you see more security issues come up from this kind of service architecture, or is it pretty much the same deal, just a different wheelhouse?
No, definitely. Docker just introduces another layer of insecurities. So it's just an extra layer. But I think I was never a fan of Docker, mainly because of these reasons. But I think since Rails starting to embrace it, and it's becoming the officially supported way to deploy Rails apps, probably we need to go to that direction and just make sure we make everything more secure and look into how can we lock down everything in Docker to not have any open issues for security.
So this is a great start, right? Like what about Rails protects people now from some of these, excess RF? And, we can get into other pieces of it, but like what portion of Rails specifically, gives us protection, and maybe what should you worry about even though it's there?
I think Rails does a great job with security. It has great defaults. It prevents you from a lot of stupid issues, but that also means Rails devs don't think about security. So a lot of people don't even know about potential security issues, and they might end up shooting them into the leg because they don't think about security at all. Like XSS, Rails, if you are using ERB, 99% of the time you are secure from XSS. But because people don't even think about XSS, they might just do something silly. Or if something changes in Rails and there's a new, let's say, a new tech helper which explicitly doesn't prevent XSS, people don't even think about checking that. I think that's a bit of a problem because security is pretty neglected in the Rails world today. If you look at last year's RailsConf, I think there was a single talk about security. which is to me a bit surprising. We should talk more about it, because even though Rails does a good job preventing us from doing certain things, you can still do, and you can still introduce logic bugs, which Rails can't prevent you from doing this.
Well, you're kind of picking on Rails developers, and I guess this isn't an excuse so much as just an observation. But I talk to people in JavaScript, I talk to people in Elixir, I talk to people in a lot of other communities where they, have frameworks and they have different approaches to building apps. And the vast majority of developers aren't thinking about security. It's not unique to Rails. And that doesn't excuse us from not doing it. But yeah, it's not like somebody in another community is picking up good habits and then just coming over here and dropping them, right? If they transition to Ruby or Rails. It's a universal problem.
I was talking to this newer Rails developer, and I said, hey, give me a query that can do this. And they gave me back, and they were just interpolating in stuff into a query instead of escaping it properly. Then I also asked, hey, I want to run this ffmpeg script. And so give me a script that I can give it some arguments and do that kind of stuff. And it, again, just interpolated in the parameters that I was giving it. And so in both those cases, that's going to cause SQL injection or remote code execution. And, this developer's name, to call him out, was ChatGPT. And that's the issue that we're going to run in. I know, right? So that's what we're going to run into, where at least with something like Stack Overflow, we have our wonderful community to say, whoa, what you're about to do is pretty dangerous. You may want to take this approach. But with ChatGPT, it's just kind of spitting back whatever it wants to very confidently. So you think what it's telling you is going to be correct, and it may actually work. But if you don't understand the security implications of what you're copying and pasting and putting into your applications, you have a much bigger issue down the road.
Well, I really like ChatGPT for a lot of things, but it really is the ultimate. So I found all this stuff on the internet and I mashed it up and put it into a nicely formatted thing for you.
That was an interesting example for ChatGPT. When Rails 7.1 will have a new feature which is called regroup. On the active record query, you can call regroup. And someone asked ChatGPT to explain what that does. And of course, ChatGPT doesn't even know about it because the training data is from 2020 or something. And it gave a very confident explanation that regroup means that you can regroup the already grouped results, which is bullshit. It's just like reware. So you already had a group by query on the active record chain, which you can replace with a different one if you need. And people thought, oh, how cool is this now? I can regroup the already grouped record in active record, which is not true. I think that would be quite challenging to achieve with active record.
Yeah. Well, and I think this just illustrates the point further that, the training data is all based off of a lot of stuff that was on the internet at the time of the training. The other thing is that it was also trained by people essentially saying this is good input or bad input, right? Which adds a lot of bias to the results and things like that. I think most of the time, if you're trying to explain something that's generally well understood, it'll do fine. But anything that's new, you just kind of have to take with a grain of salt. And I think you need to verify anything you get from it anyway. But when I talk to people who are using it to do things like write chunks of code, it's really fascinating what they get back sometimes. And some of the issues that exist with it. Yeah,
because I was using it for some machine learning stuff. I was getting into Python, into PyTorch, and that's not my wheelhouse. I don't know a lot of what it's actually doing with the epochs and all that junk. So I was having ChatGPT, just help out with some functions. And honestly, looking at it, I have no idea if I'm introducing a security issue or something, or if when I'm doing it safe or not. But it works. So I use that in this bit of code that I was playing around with. So I think, while it can help us, I think it's the overconfident junior developer who just doesn't quite have the experience yet, but can talk about it very confidently.
Or the business person who thinks that they're taking an economic shortcut.
I think the biggest problem here is copy-paste mentality. Right?
No, we've been doing that for years.
I mean, even if you like, even say that you open up Rails source code and you say, oh, this is a really, nice snippet of code. I'm going to reuse this in my portion. And then they go and they say, well, the security team found that there's an issue with this code, but you don't know that because you don't follow the source code that closely. And so now you have a security issue that has been fixed, but because you extracted it from somewhere else, right? Like it has a security issue. I feel like this is probably like from like a mid, even junior level, like if you're just like moving around code like this is probably one of the most common ways to expose yourself to security risks, right? Is where you're just like taking something where you found, repurposing it, and then it's lost to any upstream changes. I don't know
but
if
I do
there's
that.
a good fix to that. Yeah, I mean, I do it too. But
right?
I mean, that's
that
all
worked
the
great
more
over
reason.
here. Yeah.
It's all the more reason why it's a great example of how problematic it is, right? Like, what is a good way? Greg, do you have any ideas for this on how to better strategize this kind of development so that it's a little safer outside of, just learn security?
I think that's tricky, but I think this is what really shows why it's important to kind of outsource your most important security related parts like authentication. Don't throw your own authentication, because then let's say you use device, and if an issue found in device, you are being notified about it, you can upgrade and it's all fixed for you. But if you roll your own authentication and let's say use some APIs from Rails, which they find a security issue with it and you need to update how you use that API, then you might not know about it. Like there is this new authentication gem called Authentication Zero. Maybe you guys heard about it. And what that does, that's not really a gem. It's a generator. So you install it, you code the generator, it generates all the code for you. But from then on, if there is a security issue with the code it generated, how are you going to know about it? You can't just easily upgrade. Actually, I think now what they do is every release, they have like a release note where they tell you, so when you run bundle update, you will see at the output that we found this security issue and you have to do these changes in your code to upstream or downstream your changes. But I think that's the important thing. Anything which is security conscious, you should rather use something which is maintained by other people who know security better than you. Like encrypting crypto, I'm terrible with cryptography, so I just try to rely on people who are smarter than me on that. I wouldn't roll my own cryptography because it's just out of my depth. But you can use something which Rails provides, and that's usually reviewed by security professionals, by cryptographic professionals, and it should be safe to rely on those. And just always watch the news if there is a security release, which we just had for Rails 2 days ago, I think. Then upgrade as soon as you can.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, I put on any given project, I mean, the small ones I might add 20 gems to, right? Because I'm pulling in stuff that I don't want or need to write. And then I can just, patch it together for my needs. It's really hard even just to keep up with that or its dependencies, right? So, I pull in a device and it depends on Warden and a whole bunch of other stuff. That depends on some other stuff. That depends on some other stuff. And so, that just seems impossible to me. But even just the bunch of gems I'm using to just kind of compose a Rails app, if there's a vulnerability in any of those, I don't always hear about it, right? And so if there's a 0 day in one of the gems that even just Rails itself uses, I may not hear about it for a month or two. And I'm out there running, with my vulnerabilities flapping out there in the wind for anybody to take advantage of. And so it's still a hard problem.
There's a solution to that problem. It's called bundle audit. If you run bundle audit on your CI server, let's say daily, or just on every pull request, then whenever a security release is published for any of your dependencies, then you are notified about that. And you know, I need to upgrade.
That's a good tip. And I always forget that's there.
Well, that's the thing with security. We forget things, we overlook things, we make the wrong assumptions, and that's how you introduce a security vulnerability. It's not that people are not smart enough or not good enough. It's just we are humans. Humans make mistakes.
Well, I like, though, that you said put it in your CI pipeline, right? So now it's in a workflow that automatically runs. And so I don't have to be smart enough to run it every dang time, right? I have a computer out there that says, you checked in code, and I know I need to run this every time, and it just does it for me.
I like doing it as a Git hook. So that way, before I even push up, it barks at me. So that way I definitely don't forget about it. But I was going to say, just blindly running a bundle update, especially if you don't have version locks within your gem file, can also be a security issue, especially if a particular gem has been hijacked by someone else. They inserted in some malicious code and released a new version. You could be pulling in malicious code without even knowing about it. You think that, there's a new version of this gem, so that's good, that's safe, it's going to be more secure, more performant, or whatever. But you don't really know unless you're actually going in and reviewing the code changes of all those gems.
Yeah, definitely. What you should do when you upgrade any of your gems, you should go and check the changelog on GitHub, because if it's been hijacked, then what you see on GitHub is different from what the actual gem is. And you might see that, oops, they don't actually have this tag on GitHub. So why do I get this update from Ruby gems? And then you can investigate and maybe you realize, oops, it's not from the gem authors. It's just the Ruby gems account is hijacked. But now I think Ruby gems now has 2FA, so it's less likely to get accounts hijacked.
Yeah, I don't think that happens too often, but I thought that there was a case of that happening in the past couple of years.
Yeah, there were a few cases. And it was because people used very easy to guess passwords on Ruby gems. And it was brute force, their account were brute force. And then people could just push any release on their name.
I think they're around some crypto gems, like Bitcoin gems and stuff.
Thankfully, though, now that Ruby gems requires two-factor authentication for, a certain number of downloads, right? I forget what the limit is now, but it's a hard requirement for certain gems to have two-factor authentication, I think, for this reason. I don't know how low that limit is.
I think if you have more than, I don't know the exact limit, but if you have more than a few thousand downloads for your gem, then you have to enable 2FA.
It's like, why would you not do that anyways?
Inconvenience?
I know, but we can trade that inconvenience for a different kind of lack of security. Like with 1Password or any other password manager now, you can have your 2FA QR code scanned by that password manager, which, I mean, that's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. So I don't know if I really recommend that, but I mean, at least it's there.
Yeah, that's true, but it's always the extra step. The problem with security is inconvenient. If you want to be secure, then you need to take some extra measures. And that's why people sometimes choose the easy path and don't take security seriously enough. Like they don't use a password manager because it's just easier to type in the same password everywhere all the time. Or they don't use 2FA because that requires an extra step. You need to pick up your phone, get the code, etc. But you can get a security key. I use a security key, which is plugged into my laptop, so I can just touch it and it's all done. I have my second factor.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I love the UB keys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have the UB key.
Are you under increasing pressure to ship code faster than ever before? Then it's time to work smarter with Raygun Performance and error monitoring tools. Raygun gives you instant visibility into the health of your software. What makes it so unique is that it not only tells you when something's gone wrong, but it shows you exactly where it's gone wrong and how to fix it right down to the line of code. Made by developers for developers, Raygun's suite of monitoring tools are used and loved by thousands of software teams every day. Monitor your entire tech stack with widespread language support and native integrations with Microsoft Teams, GitHub, Jira, Slack, Bitbucket, Octopus Deploy, and more for even greater visibility. Visit Raygun.com to resolve issues faster and to deliver flawless digital experiences for your users. That's Raygun.com to get started with your 14-day free trial.
Cloudflare actually had a promotion. It's ended now, so sucks to be you if you didn't get it. But they sold the YubiKeys for $10 a pop. They're normally like $40 or something. So I got a handful of them that I'm going to give out as gifts to family and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting with the 2FA. Just, like I use it for all of my stuff, but like getting my wife or my in-laws or my mom to use it.
Even it's hard because password managers even have two-factor authentication built into it, which I don't necessarily agree with because it's kind of just like putting all your eggs in one basket. Like if somebody, God forbid somebody got access to your, master key and was able to get into your password manager, but then they also have your two-factor also. So it's like, why have them both there? It doesn't really add any value to me, but I don't know. I was going to ask you, Greg, about your article because you kind of mentioned, how hard it is to detect and monitor for these server-side request forgeries. Is there anything monitoring wise that you can do to kind of help assist?
Well, I think what every Rails application should have some sort of a static code analyzer run on it, like Brakeman. There's another one called Spectre, which I created. And there is a new one, which I just see this week. I think it's called BRARE or something like that. And because that helps you to catch issues before you deploy them to production. So you write some code changes, you run the checks on it, and it analyzes your code for potential vulnerable code snippets. And if you have any, it highlights that, you can review it, and maybe it's a false positive, or you can fix it. And then the next thing is just logging on the server. So, for instance, you can, and also hardening the server, like disable anything which can make outgoing requests from the server if you don't have to do any outgoing requests, and just log everything and get alerted if there is anything suspicious going on the server. Nobody should run like a database dump except your backup system. So if you see if you log all those queries and you have alerts on those, if you use Datadog or something which can run, if you can configure it to analyze your logs, and if it sees any pattern, then you get an alert. You can configure that to help its security, like analyzing the logs, and if any interesting things are found, then it just alerts you. Because the other thing with security, it's one thing to try to prevent security issues, and it's another one to react when you have one. Because sometimes companies don't even know that they got hacked. Cyber criminals these days are professional business people. They try to make as much money out from you as they can. They are not going to deface your application. They try to stay stealthy.
Right.
And that's why people don't even notice sometimes they got hacked. They just realize when their data is on sale on the black markets. Someone just extracted all of their data. And then they get the fine from the authorities because they didn't follow all the security practices they should have. So I think those are the things you can do to prevent security issues and to react on those issues.
I'm curious, Greg, what's the wildest security disclosure that you've seen?
The wildest, I think it's Heartbleed. It was quite a few years ago. But the interesting thing about Heartbleed, someone wrote a security book, a book about cybersecurity, and he actually discussed that vulnerability years before it became found. So it was out in the open, but nobody actually realized that issue is real because nobody looked at the source code. And Heartbeat was in OpenSSL, and it was maintained by one guy who just did it for like out of passion, and every big company was relied on it, like Google, Facebook, everybody. So that's a very interesting story how all those big companies didn't spend a penny on that project. They used it, they relied on it. And then, of course, when a security issue hit, everybody was surprised.
Yeah, that some guy in Nebraska in 2003, right?
Yeah.
The XKCD comic, for those who don't know.
Yeah. And there was also another one which I think is very interesting. Just highlight how stealthy these people are. There was a Ukrainian gang who hacked into a news outlet in the States, and they were monitoring all the press releases. And this news outlet was it was publishing about the stock markets. So these guys got the info before it was public about certain companies. And they were trading stocks based on that inside information before it got published. And they made tens of millions of dollars before they got caught.
Man, I remember all the trainings I went through at Morgan Stanley where they were like, you can't, right? All the warnings about not doing the insider training and how carefully you have to guard that information. So,
working for a company after they've had a breach like that really sucks. I heard just some horror stories of people who worked at some companies that had data breaches. And so even the developer computers got locked down so hard, you couldn't even run a bundle installer, add gems into your gem file because, it was just all locked down. Which, in retrospect, isn't a horrible thing. It keeps things a lot safer at the expense of the convenience. Like you said, security is inconvenient. So it's how far do we want to take it? Are we being too cautious if we lock everything down so hard where it's inconvenient? Or is there a middle ground where some things are acceptable security risks?
You need to be pragmatic about it, I think. So you need to find the middle ground and make like a risk assessment, how likely you are going to be hacked. And it depends on the company. If you're a bank, of course, you need to take everything super seriously. Like don't have the same network available in your lobby than what you are using in the back office. That should be all separated on the network level. But if you are just let's say a web agency, of course, you can have the same Wi-Fi, the same network for your workers and for everybody who just comes in for a meeting, because you don't have a huge security risk with that. Well, I worked for a security agency. The way I got into security is I took a Ruby job for a company who were a security agency. And those guys, they were crazy about security. Like we had 3 different networks in the office for each was totally separated. And depending on your role, you had access to those. And like getting into the office was not like getting into a regular office. You had to go through security checks. So those guys took it really seriously. Yeah. And everything was hosted on their own infrastructure. Deploying things was so complicated because of the security concerns they had. It was unbelievable. It was very, very inconvenient.
Yeah. I think paranoia plays into that a bit as well, because I have 4 different networks in my home. So I have some servers in my home. Those are on a completely separate VLAN. Then I have my work where I have my workstations and stuff. That's on a completely separate VLAN. Then I have anything that the kids or IoT devices access on a separate VLAN. So their computers are doorbell things, security cameras are on a separate VLAN. Then I have a 4th one for guests. So if they come in and want to use our Wi-Fi, then they cannot access any of my servers, my home computers, the kids' stuff. They could just access whatever's on that LAN. So maybe I'm just paranoid, but I like that separation of concern.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice setup.
I think education on like security practices is like probably most important at your employee level, right? Because like if you think about all the major like security breaks. Like the one that comes to mind is LastPass, right? Where they just can't catch a break. But it's like somebody, on a different company's, had a VPN that was behind, it was Plex. So they had a Plex that was behind a couple versions, and they had exposed to the public internet, and they had exploited to get through Plex to access some credentials that they had stored that they were using it for their work computer too. And then they used that, right? It was a step-by-step process where they had just targeted somebody at a company that they knew would have access to what they wanted. And because they had not followed the proper, security practices on their own, they had infiltrated kind of through a server-side request forgery, through a series of events, right? But it seems like this is a common pattern, right? Where people just aren't, holistically following the best practices, and that creates the exploit, right? And it's not necessarily one individual thing. It's not, XSS. It's not, server request forgery, right? It's a whole series of things where it really stems from education, right? Where all of the people aren't following the practices, and that's the flaw. Is there something that outside of just completely overhauling your security practices, what are some things people do to help create that balance amongst their employees?
I think that's a difficult problem to solve, but you should solve it on the technical level. So I think LastPass made a huge mistake because they didn't encrypt everything, which they should have. And that's what they said, we encrypt everything for you. But that was a big lie. And what you always need to think about, okay, here is my server. It's open to the public. What if someone gets access to it? Okay, now they are on my network. What can they do if you are on my network? If everything is encrypted, which are sensitive data, they might not be able to do anything malicious because they can extract all the information, which is kind of okay. It's still not okay, but it's not super sensitive. But if you don't encrypt the important bits, then of course you have a problem. It's like you actually are exposing data which you shouldn't if someone gets access to your network. And then you can take it in these steps like this. Always do a risk assessment and take it step by step. What if they get access to the data? What can they do with the data? Will I be notified if they get access to the data? That's why Rails encryption is really cool now. It's super easy to encrypt certain fields in the database. If you want them to be non-deterministic, that's also possible, but then you can't search on it, or you can make it deterministic, which is a little less secure, but at least you can search on that data. So I think that was the main problem with LastPass. They didn't encrypt things which they told us they do. And that's why I don't like this whole cloud-hosted password manager stuff. I used 1Password for a long time, but now they are forcing everybody to use the cloud-hosted vault, which I don't want to. I want to own my vault. I want to see that it's an encrypted chunk of bytes, and I know if I don't know my master key, nobody's going to access it. I can put it out in the open and nobody can access it. But I only know this for sure if I see the actual file. If they store it in the cloud, how can I verify that?
That's fair. One of the nice things with the cloud password managers, though, is the ability to share credentials, right? So I have some folks that work for me that aren't local to me. And so I have to give them my password. I don't necessarily want to copy and paste it into Slack and say, here you go, right? So How do you get around that?
The way I get around it, I made a little tool for myself. It's actually open source. It's a Rails app. It's hosted on secrets.spectrehq.com. And what this does is you can enter any data and you click a button, it encrypts it in your browser. So the server actually never knows your keys. And you can send them a link, and you can send, let's say you email them the link. Here you can retrieve this password to this service. And you text them or you send them in a Twitter DM or whatever, or an instant message, the decryption key. So you separate the two, and then they can connect it, they retrieve the data, and then the data is deleted from the server. So you pass the data in a pretty secure manner to anyone who needed to access it. And then they can save it in their own password manager. It's not as convenient as clicking a button in one password, but at least you are not putting all of your data into the cloud.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I did read up on the LastPass stuff and switch to 1Password. So now I'm starting to think that maybe, I don't know. You're making me think about the way I do things.
Yeah, I think 1Password used to be great. But the reason I'm not with 1Password anymore, because I switched to Linux a few months ago. And on Linux, on the Mac, you can still buy their own client, which works with a local vault. So you can host your vault wherever you want. But on Linux, they don't have that version. They only have the new version, which is cloud-based. Which I was like, I'm not going to use that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, it depends what you're, storing in your passwords. Like, what their accounts are for, right? Like, if you're trying to, like, I don't know, like, order DoorDash or something, like, maybe the convenience of having a 1Password is nice, or something that you use frequently that doesn't really affect too much, right?
Yeah, but I have my Portuguese government access stored in my password manager, and they don't have 2FA, which is ridiculous. Oh, no. So if anyone gets my password, they can issue invoices in my name. They can screw me up really badly.
I'm honestly surprised how many people choose two-factor authentication over SMS still. It seems to be like the default for banks, which is mind-blowing to me.
What's the default for banks?
If you like the typical bank two-factor authentication is typically over text message, like an SMS, which is like not really a secure way to deliver that, because it can be. There are ways to intercept, right, and spoof it, and I don't know. To me, that's not really a good way to do it. Maybe it's like a good stopgap, but for like for things like banks, I feel like there are so many other options that are way more secure that it seems like a weird default to me.
Yeah, definitely, because you can do swim swapping. And if you target someone, that guy has millions in the bank. And then you know their phone number, you know which phone number they use. You do some social engineering, and then you swap their SWIM to your own device. You get the code, you are in, you do the transfer. But now banks actually, at least in Europe, if you transfer an amount over a certain threshold, they don't let that go through. They tell you to call their call center and authorize the payment, the transfer. But then you can also, maybe you can pass that as a malicious actor. Because I did that once with my bank, and then the lady didn't speak English. So she said, oh, I need to transfer you to someone. He transferred me to the next guy. The next guy told me, oh, Mr. Molnar, so you want to do this transfer? I said, yeah, just I would like to do it. Please let it go through. He said, okay, it's all done. Have a good day. I was like, oops, sorry, but you didn't actually check if I am Mr. Molnar. I've been just transferred to this by someone else. And he said, oh, seriously? I thought my colleague already checked your identification. I was like, no, she didn't ask me any question except my name and my account number, which is public information, basically. So sometimes they do mistakes, but it's humans. Humans make mistakes.
Yeah.
We need to accept that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's interesting too, because that, you talking about the human mistakes reminds me of the book Ghost in the Wires. And he talks about some of the exploits where he would call one person, then he'd get enough information to call the next person. And eventually he had enough information about the organization and who the people were and what they did that he could call up and act like he was somebody that belonged because he knew enough to fake it. And then he would get them to give him, information that allowed him to get into places and systems that he shouldn't have.
Are you talking about Kevin Mitnick?
Kevin Mitnick, yep.
Yeah.
That
the
story
biggest
is
hacker
wild.
who was not technical at all.
It's so wild. but I highly recommend it as a book.
When we sit down at dinner with the kids, I'll sometimes play a game with them where I will give them a scenario and then have them respond. And we'll go through like the whole question back and forth. And then at the end, I'll tell them the mistakes that they made. Like, I'm some bad actor trying to get information from them. And, they will say, no, my brother doesn't do this. I'm like, well, you just gave me more information that I did not have before. Now I know you have a brother and stuff like that. So trying to prep their minds early to, I guess, be non-trusting of outside folks and stuff, because you never know when someone's trying to get information from you so they can use it later to attack you.
Well, it's funny too, because you get businesses. I have businesses call me up, right? Because they've got, they need me to pay a bill or something, right? I didn't get it in the mail, or my kids lost it or something, right? And so I'm a week late and they want me to pay the bill. But in order to verify it, they call me up and then ask me to give them my personal information. Right. And I'm always like, no, I'm not going to give that to you. And then they get all kinds of frustrated. And I'm like, wait, but you called me. Right. And so sometimes it's, well, I'll just, I'll find the information. I'll verify the phone number, and then I will call that phone number and I will take care of things. Right. But I'm not going to just give you my home address and my debit card number so that I can pay my bill, even though I do actually have a reasonable, I feel reasonably safe that they are who they say they are. It's just, I don't know if I can trust it. And it's really funny because, yeah, I think most people they call up, they're like, oh, yeah, sorry, here's my debit card number. Thanks.
I've actually had the same thing happen to me with Amazon. So it wasn't Amazon, it was a scammer. And what they did was somehow they were able to make a few small transactions on my bank account. It was just a few dollars and stuff, but it was enough to where I noticed it. And so on that transaction online, I saw a phone number next to the transaction. And so I Googled that phone number, and it was immediately flagged as a known scammer. So I then contacted my bank and then had my bank, verify and remove those transactions. But I have no idea how they did that crap. It's crazy. But I'm sure a lot of people would fall for that, where they would just call that number on their bank statement thinking that, like, oh, this is wrong. I need to call the bank or call this company. And then they give out even more information that will probably further authorize more larger transactions to be withdrawn.
But they had enough information to impersonate Amazon.
Or they just, you can really make anything show up on a big transaction.
We're kind of getting toward the end of our time here. Are there other security things that most Rails developers overlook, Greg? Because, yeah, like you said, Rails kind of does a lot for you in this area. And so I'm just wondering, are there glaring mistakes that I'm missing because I just assume that Rails is picking up the tab on a lot of this stuff?
There are a few interesting things which people don't know that are insecure in Rails by design. I think the most well-known is link to. So if you call link to, it takes the first parameter is the string, which will be the href attributes text, and the second parameter is what the href attribute will be on the link. But according to the HTTP specification, that href attribute can contain a URL, and the URL can have any, how do they call the first part? It's any handler. So that handler can be a JavaScript handler. So if you accept, let's say you have a website where you allow your users to enter their website's domain, their website link, and you don't validate that, they can just put, instead of HTTPS : / they can just put JavaScript : / and the JavaScript payload. And whenever someone clicks that link, that JavaScript will be executed in their browser. That's a not so well-known one. And also the other one is active record ordering. I think now with the latest Rails, they changed it. But the order clause of active record, if you passed in any user supplied data, that was not escaped at all. That was passed straight to the SQL query. So if you had like a table where you list items and you allow your users to sort by columns, and you don't use a whitelisted columns, if someone sends a SQL payload into the request in the field for the sort column, then they could get a SQL injection. But for this, there is a site called Rails SQLi, I think, railsqli.com or something, where all of these APIs which are insecure by design are listed for various Rails versions. So I think it's a good idea to read through those. For the XSS, it's more tricky because I don't think there is like a one place where you can check all of the insecure APIs of Rails, where you need to escape things yourself if you supply data to those calls. And I think the other thing which every team should have, if you have someone on your team who's security conscious, who's always on the lookout for security issues, and you build into your code review process a kind of security check, always question, is this thing secure? Did we think about security when we implemented this feature? How could a malicious actor circumvent things here? That's a great thing to have. Because we all do mistakes. I write insecure code. I introduced vulnerabilities into applications myself, even though I didn't intend to. But when you write code, at least when I'm writing code, I'm trying to solve a problem. I try to come up with a code which is fast, performant, and it does the job which it should. I rarely think about security initially. It's usually an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
So if you miss that step, then you are like, okay, but is this actually secure as well? Or did I make a wrong assumption? Then you might introduce vulnerabilities. So it's always good if someone checks everything you do.
Yeah, to add on to that, the Ruby on Rails guides has a security section that has a great kind of summary of all the touching points to look out for, and where some things Rails does and some things that you just have to, know about. And I always go back and read that every once in a while because I always find something new, and it's a great resource.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a bit big, so it's easy to miss.
It's very big.
That's why you need to reread them, and then you absorb more and more and more all the time you read it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a better way to digest that.
I don't know. But I think if you shoot yourself in the leg once, then you will remember for the rest of your life. So if you make a mistake and you find it out later, then you will remember to that particular issue for the rest of your life, and you will prevent it always. And you will also be on the lookout for people's changes, which would end up with the same problem. So I think it just comes with time and experience.
Cool. Hey, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the Top End Devs membership and let you know what we've got coming up this month. So in February, we have a whole bunch of workshops that we're providing to members. You can go sign up at topenddevs.com/sign up. If you do, you're going to get access to our book club. We're reading Docker Deep Dive, and we're going to be going into Docker and how to use it and things like that. We also have workshops on the following topics, and I'm just going to dive in and talk about what they are real quick. First, it's how to negotiate a raise. I've talked to a lot of people that they're not necessarily keen on leaving their job, but at the same time, they also want to make more money. And so we're going to talk about the different ways that you can approach talking to your boss or HR or whoever about getting that raise that you want and having it support the lifestyle you want. That one's going to be on February 7th, February 9th. We're going to have a Career Freedom Mastermind. Basically, you show up, you talk about what's holding you back, what you dream about doing in your career, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to actually brainstorm together, you and whoever else is there, and I, all of us are going to brainstorm on how you can get ahead. The next week on the 14th, we're going to talk about how to grow from junior developer to senior developer, the kinds of things you need to be doing, how to do them, that kind of a thing. On the 16th, we're going to do a Visual Studio or VS Code tips and tricks. On the 21st, we're going to talk about how to build a software course. And on the 23rd, we're going to talk about how to go freelance. And then finally, on February 28th, we're going to talk about how to set up a YouTube channel. So those are the meetups that we're going to have along with the book club. And I hope to see you there. That's going to be at topenddevs.com/sign up. Well, I'm going to go ahead and push us into picks just for the sake of time. But yeah, are there good places for people to go to keep up or learn more about security before we wrap up?
If you are into web security, I think Burp Suite. It's actually the company is called Portsfigure. They have really good free to use online resources to learn about web security, which is mainly Rails devs should focus on that one, like SQL injection, XSS, server-side request forgery, whatnot. They have really good guides. And if you are interested into switching to a more security focused role, then you can also play on their playgrounds and try to learn penetration testing, how to find those kind of vulnerabilities. So I think that's a good resource if someone is interested into that. The Rails security guides, that's also which everybody should read regularly because probably don't absorb everything and in the first read. And I think those are the main ones. And just watch the news, run bundle audit daily, and be prepared to upgrade when you have to.
All right. Let's go ahead. Now, we did add the segment where you can do self-promo. So I'm going to let Dave go first because we haven't heard from him in a while. Dave, what are you working on that people should know about?
I don't know if people should know about it, but I've been working on this AI stuff, and it is such a pain in the butt. It's very annoying. But the biggest annoyance that I found is training models and getting good data sets. So I've been working on a audio transcription AI model. So it actually recognizes my voice, but getting sample recordings of myself into a format that you can feed into a model to train it to understand my voice is a pain in the butt. So I've actually been making a Rails application which takes a hour-long audio clip, will break it up into the appropriate small chunks that a training model needs. And then it'll allow me to insert in the manual dictations. So I have a properly trained data set, and then it'll generate the data set. But even doing a 20-second clip, converting all that audio to like a matrix data points, it ended up creating like a 40 megabyte JSON file, which is insane. So I can't wait to try this on a 1 hour long recording. It's going to be just crazy. But I actually plan on releasing this application so people can use it to create their own data sets to train AI models and stuff. You know, basically having a GUI to create that data set. And I want to eventually make it where you can scrape web data, whether it's like a Wikipedia or something similar, to pull in the web content to create data sets to then further train a model. So it's fun, but it's also very annoying.
Cool. I am working on a couple of things. I'm just going to throw them out. Oh, Valentino, let's let you go first. I just got a little excited.
Sure. I've been working on handling files from the web with the blob APIs. There's a few web APIs that the browsers provide, blob and file. And there's a bunch of utilities that it provides that let you manipulate files and handle them and test them. And it's kind of been fun. And on top of that, I'm continuing doing my AI dive in with Docs GPT at Doximity, and looking to transition to the new chat APIs, which are kind of incredible to define the context of a conversation and provide a better results. It's significantly improved.
Good deal. I've got a couple of things going on that I'm just gonna go for talking about here. One is that my contract actually ends next week. So if you have contract work and you need somebody who has been doing Rails, how long have I been doing Rails now? 19 years? No, not quite that long. 17 years. So if you, if you need somebody to help you with a project, let me know. You can just email me, chuck@topendevs.com. Our book club is also taking off. It's been really great the last few times. Next week, we actually have Andy Hunt coming to talk to us about the 7th and 8th chapters of Pragmatic Programmer. And then Dave Thomas is going to come and help us wrap it up week after next for the book club. So if you're interested in that, it should be a ton of fun. After that, we're doing The Compound Effect, which is actually kind of a self-improvement book by Darren Hardy. It also has some business application and stuff, but very much in the vein of continuous growth and improvement, and how that growth and improvement compounds on itself in order to get you where you want to go. And this is something that I've been helping my coaching clients and other mastermind members with on a regular basis, is just learn something new every day, see how it, adds to your process and things like that. So that's another thing that I've got going. And then the last project that I have going that I'm working on launching is I'm going to do a DevTools video series. And so basically I'm going to be talking about like Git and Docker and stuff like that. And I'm going to be putting out tutorial videos, kind of like Railscasts used to do, or Drifting Ruby does. And just, providing people with, hey, here's how you do a thing in Visual Studio Code. Here's how you do a thing with Git. Here's how you run this thing with Docker. Here's how you use Docker Compose. Here's, whatever other tools we're pulling in, So, I may pull in some other security tools, for example, just see how that goes. And then the other series that I keep getting asked about are React. And so I'll probably put something together for React. It means I'm going to have to learn React a lot better than I know it. But by far, that's the request that I'm getting from people, is they want training on React. So if you're doing React,
was dead. Is it not?
And then not quite. A lot of people using it. And then the other one that I keep getting asked about, and so I'll probably just put something up so people can follow it as I get around to launching it, is I keep having people ask me when I'm going to start a game development podcast. And so that is the other piece I have in the works. And I want to start putting out videos like I'm talking about with the tools and React on game dev. And so I'll probably tie in some Unity stuff, since I'm really good friends with Jason Wyman, who has his course on that stuff. And so he can help me kind of get rolling with that. But it's also a way for me to connect with my 17-year-old son who wants to be a video game developer. So we'll get into some of the design and development stuff and start putting out content if you want to learn how to build video games. So yeah, those are my things that I'm working on. Greg, what are you working on?
Well, what I would like to plug is I am a co-editor of a newsletter called This Week in Rails, where every week we cover the latest changes in Rails itself. I think it's really helpful for Rails developers if they want to be in the know of the changes in the framework. Dave actually does a video cover of that most weeks. And one of my co-editors, Emmanuel, will create a podcast cover of that, so an audio version of the newsletter every week, which is called the Rails Changelog.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, I'm also writing a book about security, the title is Secure Code Review for Rails Developers. It should be a very short book. It just wants to show how to change your mindset when you do code reviews to take security into account. It's almost done, but the last 10% is always the hardest, I think, with a book or with every project, probably. But it should be out eventually. And I think those are the two things.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's do our picks. Dave, what are your picks?
So one thing that I've been using quite often that I really love is a push to talk button, which I'm using right now. Because whenever I'm on a meeting or something, I always fumble around to find the mute or unmute button on the browser, and maybe I'm context switching or whatever. So I have a Rolls M11-Pro, and I love it. So if you have an XLR input for your microphone, then getting something like this has been a game changer. And it also has a little switch on the side that you can change it from a push to talk or push to mute. So it can go either way. And from what I've seen, there's no audible clicks or anything that happens when I'm enabling it or disabling it.
Yeah, I used to use one of those, and they work terrific. And it was the Rolls. I don't know if it's exactly the same model, but yeah, worked great. Valentino, what are your picks?
So I just have one pick really, and I just found it amusing. But there's lots of talk about GPT-4, so I guess that's a pick. Which is, if you don't know and follow all of this crazy AI stuff and large language models, it's the new advanced model that can do kind of incredible stuff. Like you just take a picture of some notes you have and it makes a website out of it. Whether or not it's secure, I'll leave that in Greg's hands. But the funny part is somebody wrote this prompt that basically acted as the robot's counterpart and said, here's $100, make as much money as you can as fast as possible. And he's kind of been live, blogging his results, if you will, and just following all the recommendations that the bot tells him to make, no matter what. And I think he was up to like 25,000 last time I saw from $100.
Oh wow!
Whether or not he lost all of it recently, who's to say? But I think it had to make a green blogging company that talked about and blogged about new green products and different things you could do to be environmentally conscious, and took outside investments to try and make more articles and more awareness. And it's pretty wild, and I recommend you checking it out. It's kind of a laugh.
I'm going to throw in some picks. I always do board game picks or card game picks. Today's no exception. The card game I'm going to pick this time is The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. And it's a fairly simple card game. Effectively, what you're trying to do is it gives you quests, and there are like 50 quests. So you wind up playing, round after round after round to complete all the quests. And each round, the quest is effectively somebody or certain people in your group have to take certain cards with certain tricks. And there are 4 suits. They're numbered 1 through 9. There's a black suit, which is the rocket suit. That's the Trump suit, has numbered 1 through 4. And that's pretty much it. So some of the time you just have to take the card. Some of the time you have to take the cards in a certain order as a group, right? So, so-and-so has to take the blue 8 first, and then so-and-so has to take the green 4 second, and then you can take the rest of them in any order. Or, maybe the red 3 or the pink 3 and the yellow. No, it's not yellow. Maybe it is. Anyway, I can't remember the colors, but you have the one of them and another one just have to be in that order. One of them has to go before the other, and then the rest of them can go in any order, including between those or ahead of them. Right. And so then you're communicating. You have a communication method where you can put a card from your hand in front of you, and then you have a token that you can use to indicate whether it's your highest, lowest, or only card in the suit. And once you've communicated once, that's it for the round. But usually then you're communicating, hey, I only have one of this suit or this color. And since you're trying to take a card in that suit or color, if somebody leads that color, I'm going to mess you up. So we've got to figure out how to get the card out of my hand before before you can go, or things like that. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. Played it with my sister-in-law and her husband. And yeah, it was awesome. The rounds take about 20 minutes, and Board Game Geek ranks it as a 1.97. So like I said, real easy, casual game. My 14-year-old was playing it with us. She didn't have any trouble with it. I think you could probably play it with 10 or 11-year-old. My 7-year-old wouldn't get it. So that's kind of where I would put that game. And mostly it's because you're communicating and trying to think of scenarios how you can get around some of the issues that come up with taking the tricks. But it's a cooperative game. So I'm going to pick that. I am also working on a series of videos. I've been working with Linode, who actually got acquired by Akamai, incidentally. So I've been working with Akamai with their team. And we worked out a deal where I would basically demo how to deploy the stuff that I use for the podcasts and things to Linode in exchange for hosting. And so if you're trying to figure out how to deploy Rails apps, you're looking at ways to do it. Right now I'm using Capistrano and Passenger. Not that the other ways are necessarily better or worse. I am seriously leaning toward getting it all deployed onto Linode and then doing another series where I Dockerize. I have everything Dockerized basically in my repos, but moving it into a mono repo and then setting up some kind of deployment system where I can deploy one or all of the services involved as Docker containers, and then have Docker Compose or Docker Swarm or something running on a server in the cloud that manages those services that way, and see how that kind of a deployment works. But anyway, those what?
Maersk. Yeah, Maersk is the deployment utility that DHH and people have wrote and contributed to, and it's very much of a Docker deployer kind of thing. And I've been playing around with it quite a bit, and it's really cool.
Interesting. I'll check it out. All right. Well, those are my picks. Greg, what are your picks?
I have a single pick, which is a YubiKey, because that makes two-factor authentication convenient and secure. It's a bit pricey, but you only need to buy it once, and it's probably working for a good few years for you. And then you can not worry about that much to have convenience and security at the same time.
Nice. All right, one more question. If people want to follow you or connect with you online, where do they find you?
I'm Greg Molnar on Twitter, and I have also my personal blog is on greg.molnar.io that people can find posts I wrote.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. Till next time, folks, Max out.